She leaned across my dining table, looked my husband in the eye, and said, "I could give you what she can't. You know that, right?" And my husband said nothing. Not a word. Not a flinch. He picked up his wine glass, swirled it once, and looked out the window like she'd just commented on the weather. That was the moment I understood everything. Not just about her. About him. About the 8 years I'd spent building something I thought was ours. I want to tell you how I got there, because if I just tell you the ending, you'll think I'm someone I'm not. You'll picture a woman who had it all figured out, who was always 5 steps ahead. I wasn't. For a long time, I was the woman who kept convincing herself she was overreacting. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that I was 38 years old, a licensed occupational therapist with my own small practice in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I had been married to my husband for 8 years. We met at a friend's cookout the summer after I finished my graduate degree. He was funny in that quiet, dry way that doesn't perform for the room. He remembered things. The name of my childhood dog, that I'd mentioned once I hated cilantro, that my mother's birthday was in March. In the beginning, that attention felt like being loved. Later, I would understand that detailed memory is just as useful for managing people as it is for loving them. He worked in corporate communications for a mid-sized pharmaceutical company. Good salary, good benefits. We bought a house in a neighborhood with old oak trees and good schools. Even though we didn't have children yet, we were trying. That's what I told people when they asked. We're trying. What I didn't tell people was that we'd been trying for 3 years. That I had been through 2 rounds of IUI that hadn't worked. That I had endometriosis, diagnosed at 34, and that the word compromised appeared in my medical records in a way that no one ever says out loud to your face, but that you read alone in the patient portal at 11 o'clock at night. My husband knew all of this. He had sat next to me at every appointment. He held my hand in the parking garage afterward and said the right things. I believed him because I needed to. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I told myself I was tired. We'd been at a work happy hour, his company, not mine, and I watched him talking to a woman across the room for 40 minutes. That's not unusual. He's social. He has colleagues. What I noticed was the way he touched the back of his neck when she laughed. He only does that when he's nervous or when he's trying to impress someone. I know because I watched him do it the first 3 months we dated, and then it stopped when he got comfortable with me. Seeing it again, directed at someone else, felt like finding a word in a foreign language you thought you'd forgotten. I didn't say anything that night. I filed it. Over the following months, I filed a lot of things. His phone face down on the kitchen counter when it had always lived screen up. A new habit of showering immediately when he got home from the office, which he explained as just wanting to decompress. Weeknight team dinners that showed up on the shared calendar with no location listed. A weekend conference in Charlotte where the hotel receipt, which I only saw because it came through on our joint credit card statement, listed check-in for 2. When I brought up the hotel receipt, I thought I was ready for a real conversation. I was not ready for what actually happened. He didn't get angry. He didn't get defensive. He tilted his head slightly, the way you do when someone says something that genuinely confuses you. And he said, "That's the conference rate. They bill it weird. You know how hotels do that." I said I didn't know how hotels do that. He sighed. Not the sigh of someone caught. The sigh of someone inconvenienced by having to explain something simple. "You've been really anxious lately," he said. "I think the fertility stuff is getting to you more than you realize. I'm worried about you." And here is the part I'm not proud of, I apologized. Not because I believed him. I apologized because I was so tired of feeling crazy that I chose the version of reality where I wasn't. That is what gaslighting actually feels like from the inside. It doesn't feel like being tricked. It feels like relief. You hand over your own perception because carrying it is exhausting, and the person you trust most is standing right there offering to take it. I went back to my therapist. I started sleeping badly. I lost 7 pounds without trying, which my mother noticed and called "finally" before catching herself. My husband told our friends I was going through a hard time with the fertility journey, and everyone was very kind to me, which somehow made everything worse. Then he told me he wanted to have his colleague over for dinner. He framed it as a networking thing. She was newer to the company, he said, still finding her footing, and it would be good for team morale to include her socially. He said her name. I'll call her by what she was to me, which was the other woman, like it was just a name. Casual, like he'd mentioned her before in ordinary ways, even though he hadn't. Not once. I said yes because by that point I had become a person who said yes to things I didn't want, to avoid the conversation that would follow if I said no. I cooked for 3 hours. I made roasted chicken thighs with preserved lemon, a farro salad, green beans with toasted almonds. I set the table with the cloth napkins we'd gotten as a wedding gift and almost never used. I opened a bottle of Mai Pinot Noir that we'd been saving. I don't know what I was trying to prove. Maybe that I was gracious. Maybe that this was my home. Maybe just that I could hold it together. She arrived 20 minutes late with a bottle of Prosecco and a smile that didn't include me. I don't mean she was rude, she was perfectly pleasant. But there is a specific kind of pleasant that operates on a frequency only women can hear, and every syllable of hers was tuned to my husband and away from me. She complimented the house. She asked about his commute. She laughed at a story she had clearly already heard. I watched him watch her. Dinner went the way a dinner goes when you are performing normalcy at the table of your own life. We talked about the company's new product launch. We talked about a restaurant downtown that had recently closed. She mentioned a hiking trail in the mountains she'd been wanting to try, and my husband said he'd been wanting to try it too, and they had a whole conversation about it right across from me like I was a centerpiece that couldn't hear. It was somewhere between the salad and the main course that had happened. My husband had gotten up to get more wine from the kitchen. We were alone at the table, she and she looked at me, directly at me, the first time she had really done that all evening, and she said it. I could give you what she can't. You know that, right? She was talking to the space where my husband had just been sitting, calling to him, or maybe to both of us. I don't know if she meant for me to hear it clearly, or if she'd had enough Prosecco that the volume control slipped, but I heard every word. The room went very quiet. I felt something move through me that I can only describe as the opposite of panic. A cold, clarifying stillness, like the moment after a car almost hits you and you're standing on the curb and your body hasn't started shaking yet. Everything sharp, everything slowing down. My husband walked back in from the kitchen with the wine bottle and looked at the two of us, and I watched his face do a complicated calculation. I picked up my napkin, folded it once, set it beside my plate. I looked at her. I smiled. And I said, very quietly, well, I hope it makes you both happy. Then I excused myself to use the bathroom, and I sat on the edge of the tub in the dark for 4 minutes, and I made 2 decisions. She left shortly after. The dinner ended the way disasters sometimes do, quickly, with excessive politeness, everyone pretending the wreckage isn't visible. My husband tried to talk on the drive. We hadn't even made it to the living room before he started, and I told him I was tired and would like to go to sleep. He said, we should talk about what happened. I said, we will. I meant it. I just didn't mean tonight. That night, I lay in bed next to him and stared at the ceiling, and I thought about every receipt I had photographed on my phone. Every screenshot of a shared calendar entry with no location. Every text notification I had glimpsed and pretended not to see. I had been collecting evidence the way you collect small rocks without any plan, picking them up, putting them in your pocket, not knowing yet that you were building something. The next morning, after he left for work, I called my attorney. I want to be clear about something. I had already spoken to her 2 months earlier. Just a consultation. Just to understand my options. Just, I told myself, to be informed. I had not let myself think of it as anything more than that. But I had done it. I had sat in a lawyer's office in my lunch break and answered her questions about our assets, our accounts, our mortgage, his income, mine, the retirement funds, the joint savings. I had paid the consultation fee from my personal checking account, which I had always kept separate because it was a habit from before we were married that I'd simply never broken. That small, unremarkable habit turned out to matter more than almost anything else. My attorney's name is Rachel. She is a compact woman in her mid-50s who wears reading glasses on a chain and does not waste your time. She had told me at the consultation that North Carolina is an equitable distribution state, which does not mean equal, it means fair, as determined by the courts, and fault can be a factor. She had also told me to keep documenting. I had kept documenting. What happened over the next 11 weeks is not dramatic in the way you might expect. There were no screaming fights. There was no confrontation where he finally admitted everything and I said my perfect speech. What there was: a process server, a stack of financial disclosures, a forensic review of accounts he had not expected me to know about, and a very quiet morning when I moved my most important belongings to my sister's house in Durham while he was at a 2-day offsite. He found out I had filed when he was served at his office. He called me 17 times that afternoon. I answered on the 18th. He said, "This is insane. You didn't even talk to me." I said, "I tried to talk to you about the hotel receipt." Silence. "I tried to talk to you every time I felt something was wrong, and you told me I was anxious and stressed and that the fertility treatments were making me irrational. So I stopped trying to talk to you and I started preparing instead." More silence. "I'm going to need you to communicate through Rachel's office going forward," I said. And I hung up. What followed was a divorce that took 14 months and was not easy and is not something I will romanticize. There were days I sat in my parked car in the parking garage of my own practice and could not make myself go inside. There were weeks where I ate cereal for dinner because I couldn't manage anything more. There were phone calls with my mother where I didn't cry and phone calls with my sister where I couldn't stop. But there were also things I had not anticipated. I had not anticipated how much space there was once I stopped performing. I had spent so long trying to maintain the shape of a marriage that I had forgotten what I actually took up. My practice, which I had been neglecting, scheduling fewer new clients, leaving earlier, bringing my anxiety through the door with me every morning, started to grow again. I hired an assistant. I referred a client to a colleague who was a better fit and felt, for the first time in 2 years, like a competent clinician instead of a woman barely holding on. The financial settlement was fair. More than fair, actually, because of the accounts. My attorney found retirement funds he had not disclosed in his initial filing. She found a brokerage account open 14 months before I ever had my consultation with her. She is very good at her job, and I had given her a lot to work with. He kept the house. I didn't want it. I found an apartment in a neighborhood I'd always liked but thought was too far from his office to be practical. I painted the living room a deep sage green that he never would have agreed to. I got a cat. Her name is June, which is not a name I chose for any symbolic reason. She showed up at the shelter in June, and it seemed practical. I heard, through the kind of mutual connection grapevine that is impossible to fully avoid, that the other woman had transferred to the company's Denver office about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. I also heard that my ex-husband had begun the process of contesting the brokerage account finding, which I understand did not go well for him. I don't think about either of them very much. That's the truth, even though it sounds like something people say to sound evolved. What I do think about is the dinner table. Not with anger. I want to be accurate about this. I think about it the way you think about a moment where your whole life pivoted and you were standing right in it without knowing the full shape of what was changing. I had cloth napkins on that table. I had cooked for 3 hours. I had opened wine we'd been saving, and somewhere in that careful, performed normalcy, I found the edge of who I was actually willing to be. She said I couldn't give him what she could. She wasn't wrong about what she was offering. She was wrong about what I was worth without it. I know that now in a way I didn't before, not because someone told me, Not because a therapist helped me reframe it, though she did, and that helped, but because I sat on the edge of my bathtub in the dark for 4 minutes and decided very quietly that I was done making my life smaller to fit inside someone else's story. I am 39 years old. I have a practice I'm proud of, an apartment that smells like coffee in the mornings, and a cat who sits on my medical journals. I host dinner sometimes, friends, colleagues, my sister and her husband, my neighbor who is 72 and brings wine and stays too late, and I love her for it. The table feels different now. It feels like mine. If you're watching this and something in it sounds familiar, the exhaustion of doubting yourself, the small pieces of evidence you keep collecting without knowing why, I want you to hear this. You are not irrational. You are not anxious. You are paying attention. And paying attention, even when it's painful, even when it takes a long time, is the beginning of taking care of yourself. That's all I have for you today. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. I read every one. And if you know someone who needs to hear that their instincts are worth trusting, share this with them. I'll see you next time. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in a grand, cosmic way, just in the quiet, practical way you think about things when you're sitting alone in an apartment you chose for yourself, drinking coffee that's exactly as strong as you like it, with a cat on your lap who doesn't care what you've been through. What I keep coming back to is this. Nothing that happened to me was random, and I don't mean that as comfort. I mean it as fact. Every choice my husband made had a consequence he didn't bother to calculate. Every time he dismissed what I was telling him, every "you're just anxious," every sigh, every redirect, he was making a decision. He just didn't think I was paying attention. That was his miscalculation, not mine. And I made choices too. I chose to believe him longer than I should have. I chose silence when I should have trusted what I was seeing. I don't say that to punish myself. I've done enough of that. But because I think honesty about your own part in things is the only way you actually learn anything. I stayed in a reality that wasn't real because leaving it felt harder than enduring it. That's not weakness. That's something almost everyone does at some point. But it has a cost. And I paid it in years and in health and in a version of myself I had to work to get back. What changed for me wasn't the dinner. The dinner was just the moment the curtain dropped. What actually changed was quieter than that. It was every small decision I made after I stopped handing my own perception over to someone else. Calling the attorney. Keeping the documentation. Maintaining the separate account, not because I planned to leave, but because some part of me understood, even before I was ready to say it out loud, that I deserved to have something that was only mine. Intelligence, I think, isn't about knowing things. It's about being willing to see what's in front of you even when seeing it is inconvenient. I was smart enough to notice. I wasn't always brave enough to act on what I noticed. The bravery came later, slowly, and it didn't feel like bravery at the time. It felt like exhaustion reaching a tipping point. But I'll take it. The other thing I know now is that integrity is not about being perfect or getting everything right. It's about what you do when you realize you've been living a compromised version of your own life. You can stay in it, or you can start building something true. That process is slow and uncomfortable and not at all cinematic. It looks like cereal for dinner and crying in parking garages and calling your sister 3 times in 1 week. But it also looks like painting your living room a color you actually like getting a cat in June and naming her June because it's practical and it makes you smile. My husband made choices that had consequences, so did I. The difference is that mine are ones I can live with, more than live with, ones I'd make again. If you've been dismissing your own instincts because someone you trusted told you to, I want you to know that your perception is data. It is worth taking seriously, not because you're always right, but because you deserve to be in a relationship, with a partner, with your work, with your own life, where you don't have to constantly override what you know to be true. That's what I walked away with. Not anger. Not even relief, really, just clarity. And it turns out clarity, once you have it, is something no one can take back from you.